Do you like men? Oh wait, I've already done that. Do you like poking men? So for absolutely no reason at all, I started putting Pokemon types onto Overwatch characters, and I've actually spent so long on this that I'm gonna make a video on it now. So there were 3 simple rules. The first rule is that I must use every type once, that's pretty self-explanatory. The second is that I cannot give a character the same typing as somebody else. So that means that if Reaper has Dark Ghost, that means I cannot give Moira Dark Ghost also. I have to choose something different. And the final rule is that I cannot use singular typings. There are a few characters that I would do only one typing for, but because of the challenge, I have to give them a second type, and it was a little difficult. There are also a few characters that I think would work better as a typing that somebody else has, but I gave them a different typing because I did not want them to be the same. With that being said, I'm going to also show an image of what Pokemon they would be, because there are many Pokemon with typings, and the Overwatch characters are bound to type with something, at least most of them. There are at least one that doesn't have a Pokemon with their typing. But with that being said, let's get started with Ana. Ana's main typing, in my opinion, is Ground. The reason I chose Ground for Ana was very simple. She is from Egypt. Egypt is typically associated with the desert, and in deserts and Pokemon games, you typically find ground types. With that being said, I think Ana's secondary type should be Grass. The reason I chose Grass was not because she heals, but instead because of her Sleep Dart, and a little bit because she can heal. Typically, when you think of the sleep status effect in Pokemon, you're thinking of the Sleep Powder, or maybe the Sleep Skin, I can't remember what it's called. The other types that have a lot of sleep moves are Normal and Psychic, but I just thought that Grass worked better because she was a healer. An honorable mention for Ana, though, is Ghost type because she ghosted her daughter. And that would be funny if she was a Ghost type for ghosting her daughter. However, now Pharah knows about her mother, so I think Ground and Grass works better. Ana can only be 3 possible Pokemon, that being Torterra, Totoschool, and Totoscruel. I'm not really sure how to say those. We'll just say that Ana is Torterra, or if you don't like that, then she can only be Totoschool and Totoscruel. I don't know, it's not a big deal. Me giving a Pokemon to an Overwatch character isn't a big deal, so I'm just gonna give them one, and we'll move on. And if you don't think that's accurate because you see another one that looks better, that's fine. This is more about just giving typings to Overwatch characters, rather than giving Pokemon to characters. Next up is Ashe. I almost gave Ashe Ground type also because she's a cowboy, and cowboys are typically associated with the desert, and desert is typically associated with ground types. However, I decided to put her primary typing as Fire. You could say she has a fiery personality, but I was doing it because of her Dynamite. Her secondary typing was actually Ground type like I said originally, but then I replaced it with Steel type because of Bob. It's kind of hard to type Ashe without also considering Bob, so I put Fire for Ashe and Steel for Bob, making them a Fire Steel type. So the Pokemon that Ashe would be, though, is Heatran, because there's literally no other Fire Steel types. So Heatran is what Ashe would be. Baptiste has a very, very weird typing at first, until I explain it. So Baptiste would be Rock Flying. That does not make sense. The first thing we must consider is Rock typing. We all know that Baptiste has an Immortality field, where you cannot go under a certain health threshold. Well, Rock types, or a lot of Rock types, just happen to have the ability Sturdy. Sturdy is where you cannot be one-shot and you will be left with like 1 HP left. So that is why I gave Baptiste Rock type. Flying I gave to Baptiste because of his Exo Boots, where he can just infinitely jump into the air. An honorable mention typing though is Water because he lives in the Caribbean or is from the Caribbean. And the Caribbean is typically associated with islands and water, so Water type would make sense, but I decided to put Flying over that just because of his abilities. If you think Water is more accurate, then that's fair. But let's see what Pokemon he would be. Baptiste would either be Aerodactyl, Archon, Archeops, or Minior. Baptiste is clearly not a fossil, he's actually quite young, so we'll give him Minior, but I mean, none of these fit, let's be honest here. Next up is Bastion, and Bastion was going to be one of those that I put a single typing on, but since I can't do that, I had to give him a dual type. So you gotta hear me out on this one because it doesn't make sense. Or well, it does make sense, I just gotta explain it. Bastion is Steel Dark. I don't think anyone expected me to say Dark. I think most people expected me to say Normal. Bastion Steel type is quite given. He is an Omnic. Bastion is the only DPS with 300 health, so he's quite tanky, given the Steel type. But Dark doesn't make a lot of sense at first. You would think maybe Normal because he's a little basic, and pure Steel type would work, maybe Electric because he's an Omnic, but Dark is because of his dark past actually. He has little robot PTSDs in the forest. And when people see him, they're typically scared of him because he's a Bastion. Another alternative was grass typing because of the forest and his little bird. However, it seems the bird doesn't really affect him much, and instead is dark past us, so that's why I did dark over grass. However, I think grass could work. On top of that, I didn't give Bastion normal because somebody else is normal steel, I'll just tell you that. So Bastion is steel, dark. The only 3 Pokemon that Bastion can be is Pawniard, Bisharp, and King Gambit. The thing is that all 3 of these are part of the same evolution line, so I'll just give him King Gambit just because that's the final evolution of Bisharp and Pawniard. Next up is another one I had a very hard time with, and that was Brigitte. In order for me to really explain Brigitte, I kinda gotta explain Reinhardt and Torbjorn, but they're so far down the line that I can't really just let them skip the line. So I'm gonna try my best to explain Brigitte without spoiling Reinhardt and Torbjorn too much. So Brigitte is Rock Ground, which is a weird typing. That's like the typing of Geodude. Brigitte has Rock type just because she's kinda tanky, but not too tanky, so she's not quite a Steel type, but she's a Rock type. But the thing is that Rock types can hit Flying types super well. And then the Ground type, I gave her Ground type because I thought it was weird that she was super effective against Flying types because she can't really hit Pharah in the sky. So I gave her Ground type because she's stuck on the ground and also she can't hit things far away or in the air. However, I've just decided to say it. Reinhardt has Ground on him, and Torbjorn's gonna have Rock on him, so I thought it'd be cool to do a combination of those two, as those are her 2 mentors, or biggest mentors. So it just worked out really well that she was Rock Ground, and they both kind of made sense, and the Ground would show her weakness towards flying. Rock typing just shows that she's tankier than the other supports, so I think Rock Ground works really, really well. It's not my favorite typing on this list, but it works. If you have any other suggestions, feel free to comment them. However, let's see what type of Pokemon she would be. Brigitte could be a Geodude, a Graveler, a Golem, a Onix, Larvitar, Pupitar, Rhyhorn, Rhydon, or Rhyperior. Again, nothing really fits, so I'm just gonna make her Geodude just because Torbjorn, I guess, would be Graveler, except he wouldn't be because that's not his typing. I really have no reason to make her a Geodude, it's just funny to call Brigitte a Geodude. Again, don't take this part too seriously just because it's impossible to give them a good Pokemon that fits them, but it is quite funny. Next up is Cassidy. Remember when I said that Ashe could be a Ground type because she's a cowboy? Well, Cassidy I ended up giving Ground type as his primary type because he's a cowboy. With that being said, what is Cassidy's secondary typing? This one's actually quite surprising. It's electric. Have you guys ever heard of Magneton the Pokemon? You know, magnets being electric and steel? I think it'd be quite cool if Cassidy's Magnetic Grenade made him an electric type. Now you could also say that Cassidy would be a Steel type too because of the Magnetic Grenades. However, since Cassidy isn't that tanky, I gave him electric over Steel because electric types are just less tanky than Steel types. Cassidy also has a cybernetic arm, so it fits too. Some honorable mentions are Fire type because of the cigarette and, you know, Ashe also being a Fire type and them being similar, so a Fire type kind of made sense, but I didn't end up doing it. And like I said, Steel type also made sense, but he's just not that tanky. Also, a weird consideration was Psychic because of his High Noon and him instantly being able to shoot them, but that's just High Noon and Psychic doesn't really fit him. Cassidy has an amazing selection of Pokemon, being Stunfisk and Sandy Shocks. So I will just say that Cassidy is Sandy Shocks simply because I did mention Magneton earlier and his Magnetic Grenade, so his name is Sandy Shocks now. However, Stunfisk was a pretty funny reveal here. Cassidy would be the greatest Stunfisk. Next up is D.va, and I think her typing would be Steel type because of her giant mech, and her secondary typing would be Flying because I can fly. This one did go through a few alterations though. Originally I had D.va as Flying Normal because the mech could fly, and the normal type was D.va because she's a normal human when she goes out of mech. However, I decided to switch that with somebody else, so in a few people you'll be seeing the Flying Normal. The other option was Steel Normal, but like I said with Bastion, Steel Normal was already taken, so I decided to go with Flying Steel because it's a flying mech. Pretty self-explanatory. D.va has 3 options, being Skarmory, Celesteela, and Corviknight. Personally, I'm going to make D.va Corviknight because I think Corviknight looks cooler than the other Pokemon there. Next up is Doomfist, and I was going to make him a singular typing, that being Fighting. But since we have the rule that we must do dual typings, he's going to be Fighting Rock. Fighting is pretty self-explanatory. He's a martial artist, he has a giant fist and he punches stuff. He's just a fighting type, it's pretty obvious. However, the Rock is a little less obvious. So I wouldn't call him tanky enough to make him fighting steel. Also, there's another character that's fighting steel, so I can't do that anyways. So a Rock is the next best thing. He can also block, you know, being tanky. He also is, kind of looks like Dwayne The Rock Johnson, I don't know. So Rock even fits even more there if you consider that. And originally I actually had him as fighting dragon, but I took away the dragon for a certain reason, and you'll see that again in a few characters. Plus some people said that dragon didn't really fit him, so I did fighting Rock. He's kind of tanky, he's a tank now, so Rock makes sense. Fighting, kind of self-explanatory. Again, this is one where I would have done just fighting, but like I said, the challenge is to do both typings, so it's fighting Rock. I also could have done normal because, you know, normal is just normal, but Rock was just better. There's only one Pokemon that Doomfist can be, being Terrakion. Honestly, not a bad match since it's a legendary. Doomfist feels like a legendary Pokemon. And you know how I said we'd get to the flying normal? Well, it's time for Echo. I already spoiled it, but I think Echo is flying normal. And originally, I had her as flying steel. But I switched her typing with D.va because I felt like the other way around made more sense. But do you want to know why I think it makes more sense? So with D.va, you can justify normal type because she's just a regular human at some point. However, with Echo, you can't really do that. It would make a lot more sense to make it so Omnics equal Steel types, so if you're an Omnic, you're automatically a Steel type. But I actually got something a little different. So the Flying type, I hope we don't have to argue over because she can fly and glide around, so I think Flying type makes perfect sense. But the normal type doesn't make as much sense. She is a tad normal, I mean, when you look at her, you don't really think of much. But the reason is because Transform in Pokemon is a normal type ability. Since Echo can duplicate other characters, just like, let's say, a Ditto can. Ditto is a normal type, and Transform is the only move it can learn. Transform is also a normal type. I think it makes sense to make her a normal type. So that's my justification for making Echo flying normal. With that being said, I got a lot of Pokemon to get through, so let's get started with Pidgey, Pidgeotto, Pidgeot, Sphero, Fearow, Farfetch, Doduo, Dugtrio, Hoot Hoot, Noctowl, Taillow and Swellow, Swablu, Starly, Staravia, Staraptor, Chatot, Pedo, Tranquil, and Unpheasants, Rufflet, Bravier, Fletchling, Peakypeck, Trumbeak, and Toucanon. Which one do I think Echo is? I have no idea. We'll call her a Pidove, because Pidove is funny looking, and it's a terrible Pokemon. I love Pidove though, he's such a funny boy. Actually no, I'm gonna make her a Chatot, because she chats a lot. Next up is Genji. It's pretty obvious that I'm gonna be giving Genji a Dragon typing, simply because that's kind of part of his and Hanzo's backstory, so Dragon typing, pretty simple. But the hard part is the secondary typing, which could be a few things. Now at first you may think that I'm going to be giving Genji a Steel typing, simply because he's mostly cybernetic, but I'm going to actually give Genji Ghost typing. Genji was allegedly killed by his brother, and so he was assumed dead, like a ghost for example. And on top of that, Steel, since Genji's not really a tank, he doesn't have more health than any other character. So I think the Ghost typing works off of that. But also the Steel typing doesn't really work with Genji since he's not really tanky at all. He only has 200 health. So even though I think Steel typing does work, I'm going to do Ghost just because it's a little more interesting, especially when it ties back into his lore. If Genji was a Ghost Dragon type, he could be a Dreepy, a Dracloak, a Dragapult, or Giratina, and I'm going to give him Giratina just because Giratina's cooler. Next up is Hanzo. It's pretty obvious I'm going to be giving him a Dragon typing also. His ultimate is literally shooting 2 dragons out, so, you know, part of their backstory. But again, kind of like Genji, the secondary typing is a little hard. I could have went with a normal typing simply because Hanzo only uses a bow and that's kind of basic. However, I went with the dark typing just because he has a dark backstory. Kind of for the same reason as Bastion. Hanzo allegedly murdered his brother, so the dark typing I think works really, really well. Also, if you wanted an interesting fact about this, dark type is super effective to ghost type. So Hanzo beating Genji, that makes sense. And then in the cinematic, you know how Genji uses his dragons to beat Hanzo? Dragon type super effective towards dragons, so it would make sense with the typings. Just thought that was cool. Hanzo's Pokemon choices are Roaring Moon, Dino, Zuelis, Hydreigon, and Guzzlord. Personally, I'm going to give Hanzo Hydreigon just because it's my favorite. That's basically how I've been choosing these. Next up is Junker Queen, and I think Junker Queen's primary typing would be Fighting. Junker Queen is the ruler of Junkertown, she's also a gladiator, so I think the Fighting type makes a lot of sense. She also plays very broadly in Overwatch, so again another reason for her to be a fighting type. I also think her secondary typing would be fire. Even though she doesn't have any fire abilities like Ashe does, Australia is commonly associated with the heat. The summers are really bad there, so I think it makes sense that the Australians had fire typings. Also, I'm not really sure what else would work with Junker besides fire, so fighting fire it is. So if Junker was a Pokemon, she could be a Combuskin, a Blaziken, Monferno, Infernape, Pignite Emboar, or Tauros Paladian form. I'm gonna go with Infernape because that's the best firefighting starter, don't at me. However, if you want a more accurate answer, technically Tauros Paladian form is fighting as the primary and fire as the secondary. It's not a big deal though. I'll be reading them off anyways, no matter what order the typing is in. Next up is Junkrat, and I think it's pretty obvious that his primary typing would be fire, not only because he is Australian, but also his hair is on fire, he has a lot of explosives, fire just makes sense. But the secondary typing went through a lot of changes, I'm gonna be honest with you. At first I wanted to do Fire Steel because he has a steel trap, but of course Ashe is already Fire Steel, so that would not work. I then put him as Fire Normal because I didn't have a good typing for it, so I just thought, hey, let's just put Normal here. But I kind of want to avoid that. If I don't have a good one for the person, I don't want to just slap Normal on, I want a reason to give them the normal typing. And so I went with Electric because I actually have a small reason for it. I don't want to use the excuse that he's energetic because technically all of these characters are energetic with how much they move, but Junkrat has a Riptire, which is, theoretically, controlled by electricity. He also has his concussion mines, which were definitely created and have electricity in them. Also, he has some cybernetics, which would be electric, or not really sure if it'd be electric now that I'm thinking about it. Either way, I think electric is the best typing that's not normal to give him as secondary, so I just went with it. Junkrat's secondary typing I'd be okay with changing if you can find a better reason to give a different typing. However, for now, he's gonna be Fire Electric. With that being said, he only has one option, and that is Heat Rotom.
You are an oven.
Next up is Kiriko. I think Kiriko's primary typing would be Fairy. I know that spirits aren't exactly the same as fairies, but they're similar enough that I would give Kiriko the fairy typing based off of her spirit fox thing. With that being said, I think Kiriko's secondary typing would be Fighting. She fights against the Hashimoto and does vigilante work, so I think Fighting makes sense as a secondary typing. Originally I had it as Fairy Normal because, again, I didn't have a good reason for any other typing. However, I think Fighting makes sense. Kiriko can only be one Pokemon, which is the Iron Valiant. Next up is Lifeweaver, and I think his primary typing is pretty simple. It'd be Grass. All of his abilities are basically based off of flowers and nature, so Grass typing's pretty simple. But then his secondary typing was a little bit harder, but I think it would also be Fairy. First off, he kind of looks like a fairy, he reminds me of one. And that's basically the main reason. I think fairies would work really well with grass types, so Grass Fairy. Lifeweaver could be Cottony, Whimsicott, Morlul Shinotic, and Tapu Bulu. Like most of the other ones, I'm not really sure what to give him, so I'm going to give him Tapu Bulu just because I like Tapu Bulu better than the other ones. After Lifeweaver, we got Lucio. Pretty sure Lucio would be an electric type because of the speed. Lucio is known for his speed boost, so I think electric type would make sense, as electric types are typically faster. And then as secondary typing, water, because he's a frog. So if Lucio was an electric water type, he could be Rotom Wash, Chinchou, and Lantern. Personally, I'm going to go with Rotom Wash because that's funnier. Next up is Mei, and it's pretty obvious that her primary typing would be Ice. The point of her character is just all about Ice, so Ice typing is just pretty obvious. However, the secondary typing is not as obvious. This was one of those where I was going to go with normal typing, but I thought of a better one, and that's Grass. She's an environmentalist, so protecting nature, I think it makes sense that she'd be a Grass type. Or I should say secondary Grass type. Obviously, it would make way more sense if she was just a pure Ice. But I'm not really sure if any other typing makes more sense, so Grass type it is because that's her job. Mei could only be a Snover and an Abomasnow. I'm gonna say Mei's an Abomasnow because Abomasnow is cooler than Snover. Next up is Mercy, and Mercy went through a few changes, so let's get into them. First off, flying was pretty obvious, as she has Valkyrie where she can fly, she has wings, she can glide everywhere, so flying type is pretty easy to give to Mercy. But the hard part is her secondary typing. The three main typings that were being argued over is Grass, Ghost, and Fairy. Grass because she's a healer and all that stuff. I don't want to use that logic, so I didn't end up choosing it. The other was Ghost because she can resurrect the dead. That one I thought was pretty cool. However, I ended up going with Fairy simply because she has Guardian Angel. You know, Angel, Fairies, kind of similar. And also, Ghost typing doesn't really seem accurate for Mercy, because even though she can raise the dead, it's just a little weird to give her Ghost. So in the end, I ended up giving Mercy Flying Fairy, except this is one of those that I think could be argued over. I think Flying Ghost also makes a lot of sense, but like I said, I ended up going with Flying Fairy. Mercy could be a Togetic, Togekiss, or Enamorus. Personally, I'm going to go with Togekiss just because I don't like Enamorus. Next up is Moira. Moira's primary typing would be Poison. Moira is able to suck the life force out of others, so Poison I think makes sense. You could also say that Moira quote-unquote poisoned Reaper to make him into a Wraith. And then her secondary typing was a little hard. We thought about Dark, but I think Ghost works a little bit better because of her Fade ability. So although I think Dark could definitely work, I think Ghost works better. If Moira was a Poison Ghost type, she could either be a Ghastly, Haunter, or Gengar. I'm just gonna say Gengar because that's the final evolution. That's about it. Moira being a Gengar is actually like the funniest thing ever. Next up is Orisa with an interesting typing. So Orisa's primary typing I think would be Bug. For whatever reason, Overwatch decided to make Orisa be similar to a bug, because she does have a couple bug skins, and also her head kind of looks like it has antennas in a way. So since I gotta give someone bug type, I decided to give Orisa the bug type. The alternative was going to be normal type since she looks like a horse, and typically real life animals are considered normal types, but I thought bug was cooler. And so the secondary typing was much easier, which was Steel type, because she's an Omnic, and she's a tank, so she's quite tanky, just like a Steel type. With that being said, what would Orisa be? And I think hers is actually pretty accurate. Orisa could be a Fortress, Scizor, Wormadam, Trash Cloak, Escavalier, Durant, or Genesect. And I'm gonna go with Durant because I think that's the closest one that looks like her. I mean, I guess it doesn't really look like her, but hopefully you see what I mean at least. Comparatively to the other ones, this one's closer than what we normally get. Next up is Pharah, and I think Pharah has a pretty easy primary typing, which is Flying, because she's the character that flies in Overwatch. So that one's pretty simple, but I think her secondary typing is a little bit harder. Some people said I should give her Steel type because she has all that armor, but in reality she's not that tanky just like Genji in-game, so I decided to not give her Steel type, and instead I gave her, believe it or not, Ground type. Now Flying and Ground kind of contradict each other, but there are some Pokemon with Flying and Ground type. The reason I gave her Ground type was because of Egypt, the same thing that I gave Anna. I thought it'd be cool that since they're mother and daughter they'd share at least one typing, kind of like what I did with Brig. And I decided to go with the Ground typing because they're both from Egypt, presumably. So let's see what Pharah could be. Pharah could be a Gligar, a Gliscor, or Landorus. I'm gonna go with Landorus just because it's cooler. That's it. That's my explanation, like I've said. Next up is Ramattra, and I feel like Ramattra is pretty easy. So as Ramattra's primary typing, I chose Fighting because he's fighting people. He says he does not fight for himself. He's the leader of Null Sector. I just feel like he's pretty obviously a fighting type. And then his secondary typing is Steel type. He's a tanky Omnic, so he's gonna get the Steel type. This is the reason I didn't give Doomfist Fighting Steel, by the way. Ramattra could be Lucario, Zamazenta, and Cobalion. I'm gonna go with Lucario, because Lucario, like I've said, is just cooler. It is now time for Reaper with a pretty easy one. So let's think of the two types that you would give Reaper. Pretty quickly you'll probably come up with Dark and Ghost. He's a dark figure that lurks in the shadows, and he's also a Ghost type because he has Wraith form. His abilities are about teleporting, he was presumed dead, or at least somewhat. His name is literally Reaper, like the Grim Reaper, an omen of death. I think Dark and Ghost just fits way too well, so he's the one who I gave Dark Ghost. Reaper only has two options, which is Spiritomb and Sableye, and I'm gonna give him Spiritomb because Sableye is a little derpy, and I think Spiritomb just fits better. Next up is Reinhardt. Reinhardt's primary typing would obviously be Ground. Reinhardt has an ability called Earth Shatter. Also, he's not able to hit range targets very well, so I think Ground typing works very, very well. His secondary typing was a bit harder. I thought about doing Normal because he's a bit basic. I also thought about doing Steel because he's a big tank, even though he's not an Omnic. And I also thought about doing Rock because he's very sturdy. However, I ended up going with Fire type, which I know doesn't make much sense at first, because he has an ability called Fire Strike, and also he has a bunch of fire coming off of him when he charges and when he swings. However, Ground and Rock also overlaid with what Brig had, so I didn't give him Rock. And I didn't go with Steel type just because I wanted it to be for Cybernetics and Omnics at this point, because I obviously did Reinhardt later because he was just later in the list. And so I thought about doing Ground Steel, and I think that's a very, very, very good alternative. However, like I said, I went with Ground Fire just because of his abilities. But I do think Ground Steel works very, very well on him, just like I think Junkrat is just a pure fire type. Reinhardt could be Nummel, Camerupt, or Groudon. I think it's pretty obvious I'm going to go with Primal Groudon. And just because I think it's so close, I'm going to also do the Ground Steel types, just for those of you who still think that Reinhardt should be Ground Steel, which would be Diglett Alolan form, Dugtrio Alolan form, Excadrill, Stunfisk Galarian form, Iron Treads, or Steelix, and I think Reinhardt would be Steelix because Steelix is cooler than the rest of them. Next up is Roadhog. For Roadhog, I have a pretty simple reasoning for what I gave him. Poison type because he wears a gas mask. He was also in the poisonous area of Australia. He also vapes using his Take a Breather, so poison type makes a lot of sense to me. And then I gave him fire type because of Australia, kind of like what I gave Junker Queen. His ultimate is also Whole Hog, which is just shooting a bunch of scrap at people, which is kind of like a barrage, and that just reminds me of the fire type. Roadhog could be Iron Moth, Salandit, or Salazzle. I'm gonna give Roadhog Iron Moth because that's the only one I didn't have to think about how to pronounce. Seriously, it took me like 10 minutes to figure out what Salandit. I still don't know how to say it. Next up is Sigma, and I think Sigma could have a few combinations, so let's get into them. First up is Psychic because he floats. He's able to make other things float with his mind. So I think Psychic is pretty easy to give him. The other one is either Rock type or Dark type. Dark type because he's able to sort of manipulate black holes, not really. I think he was kind of eaten up by a black hole, so the dark typing would make some sense, but I decided to give Sigma Rock type instead, because he's a tank, so he's tanky. But more importantly, he has an ability where he literally just throws a rock. So Rock type I think makes a lot of sense. So that means that Sigma could be a Lunatone or Solrock. And I'm going to give him Lunatone because it's darker, and like I said, Dark was going to be my second option for Sigma. Next up is Sojourn. Sojourn was a bit difficult, so let's get into her. Originally, I had her as normal type because she was a little basic in gameplay, but I decided to replace that with electric. The reason I gave her electric was because of her railgun, where it shoots out a little laser, and she's cybernetic, so she must have some electricity, or I guess not really like I said earlier, but still electric type just makes sense. And here is where I kind of break my own rule with the steel typing, but I gave her steel type as a secondary. The reason was because nothing else really fit, and also she's partially cybernetic. Well, actually, she's a lot cybernetic. So comparative to someone like Reinhardt, I think Reinhardt would work better with a steel typing, but Sojourn is just more Omnic, so I gave her the steel typing instead of Reinhardt. It's weird, like I said, I kind of broke my own rule here. I was gonna give Sojourn, I think, electric normal, but just I didn't like my reasoning for giving her normal type. And plus, other people really vouched to give Sojourn steel type, so I gave her electric steel, and I don't think there's another better for her. She kind of just doesn't fit into the Pokemon typing as well as other characters. So that's why I said I would be okay with giving Reinhardt ground steel, but I went with ground fire type anyways. Just like how I'd be okay with giving Sojourn electric normal, if electric steel was problematic. Anyways, if Sojourn was electric steel, she could be a Magnemite, a Magneton, a Magnezone, or Togedemaru. I don't know how to say that. So I'm going to give her Magnezone, because I can say that. Also, if you don't really like that I gave Sojourn electric steel because she's not really tanky. Also, if you don't really like how I gave Sojourn electric steel as she's not very tanky, Sojourn could be a Helioptile or a Heliolisk. She would probably be a Heliolisk just because it's the final evolution. Next up is Soldier 76. As Soldier's primary typing, I believe it or not, finally gave someone normal typing. Echo I gave normal typing because it's like a Ditto. However, Soldier I'm giving normal typing because he's just a generic soldier. He's based off an army man, his gameplay is pretty basic, so I gave him normal typing. This is the logic I was going to use for other characters, but I found better reasons to give them other typings. Soldier on the other hand, not really. With that being said, his secondary typing is actually quite interesting, and that is Ghost type. Soldier did fake his death, he literally has a gravestone, and he's working in the shadows with Ana. Ana also, I think, faked her death in a way, but I didn't give her Ghost type just because she is known about. Soldier I don't think is known by most people. This typing is also my favorite typing in all of Pokemon. So I kind of wanted to give at least one character normal Ghost, and Soldier just happened to fit that. If you don't know, normally Ghost is just a really fun type to use. What are the only two Pokemon he can be? That's Zora and Zoroark. And I'm obviously gonna give him Zoroark because it's the boy. By the way, it's the Hisuian form. Next up is Sombra. Sombra was pretty easy. I gave Sombra Ghost type because she lurks in the shadows. She can also go invisible. Ghost typing fits really well. And then I gave her Electric because she can hack into stuff. Not much else to say, it was pretty easy. Sombra can only be a Rotom. That is actually really funny. So Sombra is a Rotom. Not a special Rotom, just the basic Rotom. Next up is Symmetra. Symmetra was a difficult one, but I think I got it pretty well. First up, I decided to give Symmetra Psychic because she is able to put up a giant wall with just her hands. She can manipulate hard light, so I think Psychic was pretty good. But then, believe it or not, I didn't give her Electric. I gave her Normal type because she's all about symmetry and about making the perfect world, and that's pretty basic. So I decided to give her Normal type. Also, I think it's just kind of funny that Symmetra is a normal type. So Symmetra would be Psychic, Normal. Symmetra could be Indeedee, Girafarig, Meloetta, Oranguru, Wordeer, and Farage Giraffe. What is with these Pokemon names? Anyways, I'm gonna give her Meloetta because I can say that, and her hair kind of looks like Meloetta's. I mean, I think it makes sense. Next up is Torbjorn, and his primary typing is pretty easy, which is Fire type. He has the Molten Core, he's able to Overload, he just has a lot of fire-based abilities. But then his secondary typing was quite difficult actually. So we thought about Normal type just because we couldn't think of anything else. But then we thought about Electric type because of his turret. But then we thought about Rock type because of the Molten Core, like I said, it's kind of like a rock. And he also is the only DPS with armor besides Bastion. And so we actually ended up going with Rock type. This also happens to overlay with Brigitte, who is also a Rock type, which I forgot to mention it when we got to Reinhardt. But I decided to make Brigitte a combination of Reinhardt and Torbjorn. So we took Reinhardt's ground typing and Torbjorn's rock typing to make Brigitte, which is actually the only reason we didn't give Torbjorn electric type, was because Brigitte being electric ground didn't make much sense. So instead, we gave Torbjorn a rock type because it made sense, and it made sense for Brigitte. So that is why Torbjorn is Fire Rock. Torbjorn could be Growlithe Hisuian form, Arcanine Hisuian form, Macargo, Carkle, and Colossal. And I'm going to give him Colossal because I think that just fits the best. Next up is Tracer with actually quite a hard one. So her primary typing was easy. We gave her Psychic because she's able to teleport. Teleport is a Psychic move in Pokemon, so giving her Psychic was quite easy. But then the hard part was actually her secondary typing. The two that we found that were quite good was Electric and Flying. Flying because she was a pilot, and Electric because of her Chrono Accelerator being Electric. And originally I went with Flying type, but I decided to go with Electric just because I think it made more sense. Because we don't see Tracer flying very often. She did fly in 0 Hour, but we see her use her Chrono Accelerator all the time. And so even though I'm kind of doubling down on her Chrono Accelerator being Psychic and Electric, just like Torbjorn, I'm going to go with it anyways. Because even though I'm not representing her flying passion, I just think that Psychic and Electric make more sense. With that being said, Tracer can only be one thing, which is Raichu Alolan form. Which is kind of funny because it looks like he's floating, just like how pilots can fly in a plane. So I think that works really well. Next up is Widowmaker, which I think could be 2 or 3 things. First up we got Dark type because she is quite dark. She was brainwashed to kill her husband, so I think that's quite Dark type like. And then second is Poison type because she's Widowmaker, she has Venom based abilities, she's like a Black Widow spider. Which, speaking of, the third possible typing could be Bug type, because it's like a spider. However, in the end I decided to go with Dark and Poison, because I think the Poison typing kind of represents the Black Widow spider good enough, and her Dark typing, it represents her character being quite dark. I don't really know how else to explain that. So I went with Dark Poison, although if Orisa didn't exist, I would have to give her Bug. But since Orisa exists, I didn't have to give Widowmaker Bug type, so like I said, I went with Dark Poison. I think it also just looks better. Widowmaker could be Grimer Alolan form, Muck Alolan form, Stunky, Skuntank, Drapion, Quillfish Hisuian form, and Overquill. I decided to go with Muck Alolan form because I like Muck Alolan form. That's about it. I don't even think it fits that well, I'm gonna be honest with you. Winston's primary type would probably be electric, because he has a lot of electric-based abilities. His gun shoots electricity. Electric type makes a lot of sense. But then the secondary typing was a little harder. I thought about giving him normal type because he's a monkey or a gorilla, but it decided to go with fighting just because of when he ultimates. He just turns into an 1,000 health beast that just starts punching through things, so I think fighting makes a lot of sense. So if Winston was electric fighting, he would be Iron Hands, Pawmo, or Pawmot. And I think Iron Hands just looks more like Winston, so we're gonna go with that. Hammond I gave normal type because he's a hamster, and then his secondary typing I gave Steel because of his giant ball. Hammond was quite easy just because he's a hamster and a steel ball, so I mean it's pretty obvious what he would be. However, believe it or not, there is no Pokemon that is normal Steel type, but apparently there's something called Pokestar Studios, which I don't really know what that is, and there's actually a robot called F00 that is Steel normal type. So Hammond would be F00, even though I have no idea what this is from. Congratulations, Hammond, you're a Pokemon that I don't even know about. Next up is Zarya. Zarya was quite easy actually, even though it's a little obscure. Zarya would be Ice type because she's from Russia. In the Sombra infiltration cinematic, we see that Zarya was there, and Voskaya was covered in snow, so I think Ice type just makes a lot of sense because that's where she's from. And then the secondary typing was a little harder, but I gave her Dark type because she shoots out a black hole. Unlike Sigma, she doesn't really control it, even though it's in her gun. So you could say she's Ice Psychic, but I think it makes a lot more sense to make her Ice Dark because she's more of shooting the black hole rather than controlling the black hole. I don't know, I think Psychic could also work as a secondary typing because of her bubbles. But like I said, Dark type, the black hole, I think that makes a little bit more sense. With that being said, Zarya can only be 2 Pokemon, Sneasel and Weavile. Oh, actually there's 3 now. There's Chenpeo from the new generation. I did not know that until now. I'm gonna go with the new one because I just learned about it actually. And finally is Zenyatta, and most of the time I do a joke ranking at the end of the video, but this time I actually went with a serious one. Zenyatta is Psychic because he's able to flow and shoot balls. He also has Transcendence, so I think Psychic makes so much sense for Zenyatta. And then the secondary typing is Steel, which I said that I don't want to give Steel typings to not tanky characters, but I've done it again and I gave him Steel typing. He does have an invulnerability with Transcendence, so I do think it makes a lot of sense, or at least more sense than Sojourn, to give Zenyatta Steel typing, also because he is completely Omnic. But hey, what can you do? Zenyatta's 2 best typings are Psychic Steel, so that's how it is. Zenyatta could be Solgaleo, Necrozama, Beldum, Metang, Metagross, Jirachi, Bronzor, and Bronzong. I'm gonna give Zenyatta Bronzor, because it's a floating circle also. However, I'm gonna also give him Metagross because I think Metagross is better. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed. Like, subscribe. I had a lot of fun doing this video, and I really tried to make it accurate this time. I mean, I try and make all my videos accurate, but this one I actually spent like 2 weeks on, so I hope it's really accurate. There's a few that I would change, and there's a few that I would change to single typings if I could, but since it was part of the challenge to not have any duplicates, to use all the typings, and to have at least 2 typings, this is what I could come up with, and I think most of it is really, really accurate. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and I'll see you all later. Also, I have a Discord if you want. That's it. Bye.